I never imagined my son's sticky, crumb-covered iPad would be the deadliest weapon in the courtroom. Everyone viewed me as a failure who abandoned his family. But when that screen lit up and a familiar voice echoed through the silence, my wife's face shifted from triumph to pure terror. The next 7 minutes did not just save me. They exposed the vicious conspiracy I had slept beside for 12 long years. My name is John Rodriguez, and as I sat in the defendant's chair of the King County Superior Court, I realized that truth is not a matter of fact, but a matter of performance. I am 42 years old, a man who has spent the last 15 years building a career on precision and structural integrity. Yet in that room, my entire life was being dismantled by a narrative so warped it felt like a hallucination. The atmosphere in the courtroom was suffocating, a physical weight that pressed down on my chest and made every breath a conscious effort. It was a classic Seattle morning, the kind that locals pretend not to mind, but which seeps into your bones regardless. Outside the high, narrow windows, the sky was a bruised charcoal, weeping a relentless drizzling rain that tapped against the glass like 1,000 nervous fingers. The sound was low and constant, a backdrop of static that seemed to amplify the silence inside the chamber. The air in the room smelled of damp wool, stale coffee, and the distinct acrid scent of old wood polish that had been layered over decades of misery. It was the smell of dissolved unions and broken promises. I sat alone. The chair beneath me was hard oak, polished to a slick finish by the suits of countless other men who had sat exactly where I was watching their lives be carved up by strangers. I felt less like a husband and father, and more like a criminal awaiting sentencing, despite having no record, no history of violence, and a credit score that I had meticulously maintained for the sake of a family that was currently sitting on the other side of the aisle. To my left sat Elena, my wife, or at least the woman who legally held that title. She was 38, but today she had dressed to look younger, more fragile. She wore a soft pastel cardigan that was at least 2 sizes too big, swallowing her slender frame and making her appear diminutive, almost childlike. Her hair, usually styled in sharp professional waves, was pulled back loosely with stray strands, framing a face devoid of makeup. She was weeping softly, a delicate rhythmic hitching of her breath that was just audible enough to draw every eye in the room. It was a masterclass in victimhood. If I did not know her, if I did not know the steel trap of a mind that operated behind those tear-filled eyes, I would have wanted to comfort her myself. Next to her sat Arthur Vance, her attorney. He was a shark in a 3-piece suit, a man with a reputation for eviscerating husbands and leaving them with nothing but the clothes on their backs. He sat with a predatory stillness, occasionally leaning in to whisper something to Elena, handing her a tissue with a gesture of performative gallantry that made my stomach churn. But it was the sight behind them that broke me. In the back row, seated next to a stern-faced, court-appointed social worker, was Leo, my son. He was 8 years old, but in the cavernous room, he looked 5. He was wearing his Sunday best, a small clip-on tie that was slightly askew. He was not looking at his mother. He was not looking at the judge. His dark, intelligent eyes were fixed on me. He held his old, battered tablet against his chest like a shield, his knuckles white from the force of his grip. It was an older model, the screen smeared with fingerprints, a device I had bought him 3 years ago to encourage his interest in coding. Seeing him there, a pawn in this grotesque game, felt like a physical blow to my ribs. "All rise," the bailiff intoned, his voice bored. The Honorable Judge Sterling entered the room. He was a man composed of sharp angles and gray stubble, known throughout the legal circuit for his impatience and his particular disdain for men he considered to be deadbeats. He took his seat with a heavy sigh, adjusting his glasses and peering down at us with an expression that suggested we were wasting his valuable time. He looked at me, and I felt the temperature in the room drop another 10 degrees. There was no presumption of innocence in his eyes. There was only judgment. "We are here to hear the petition for divorce and custody arrangements in the matter of Rodriguez versus Rodriguez." Judge Sterling said, his voice grating like gravel. "Mr. Vance, you may proceed with your opening statement." Vance stood up, buttoning his jacket with a smooth, practiced motion. He walked to the center of the floor, not looking at the judge, but looking at me. His eyes were cold, dead things. "Your Honor," Vance began, his voice a rich baritone that commanded attention. "We are here today to discuss a tragedy. Not a sudden tragedy, but a slow, agonizing erosion of a family caused by the man sitting right there." He pointed a manicured finger at me. "John Rodriguez presents himself as a successful architect, a pillar of the community. But behind closed doors, he is a tyrant. We will demonstrate that Mr. Rodriguez is a classic narcissist who is engaged in over a decade of financial abuse, emotional neglect, and psychological intimidation." I gripped the edge of the table, my fingernails digging into the wood. The words washed over me, toxic and false. "He has prioritized his ego and his position at Etheria Systems over the basic needs of his wife and child." Vance continued, pacing rhythmically. "He works 14 hours a day, not to provide but to escape. He controls every cent that enters the household, forcing Mrs. Rodriguez to beg for grocery money, while he funnels funds into personal accounts. He has abandoned his wife emotionally, leaving her isolated in a home that he treats like a hotel. We are asking for full physical and legal custody of the minor child, Leo, and an equitable division of assets that reflects the years of suffering my client has endured. 14 hours a day." He made it sound like a crime. He did not mention that those 14 hours paid for the mortgage on the 5-bedroom house in the Highlands. He did not mention that they paid for Leo's private STEM academy, for Elena's luxury SUV, for the 3 vacations a year she insisted on taking. As Vance droned on, painting a portrait of a monster I did not recognize, my mind snapped back to the morning this nightmare began. It was a Tuesday, 3 months ago. The rain had been falling then, too. I remembered walking into the kitchen exhausted from an all-nighter at the firm, desperate for coffee. Elena was sitting at the island, dressed in her silk robe, sipping green tea. There were no tears then, no trembling hands. She looked immaculate, her posture rigid. She had slid a manila envelope across the marble countertop. The sound of the paper sliding against the stone was a dry hiss that I could still hear in my nightmares. "What is this?" I had asked, my brain still foggy with fatigue. "It is over, John," she had said. Her voice was not sad. It was bored. It was the voice of someone ordering lunch. "I filed yesterday. I want the house. I want 60% of your Etheria stock. And I want full custody of Leo. If you fight me, I will ruin you." I had laughed, then a dry, confused sound. "Elena, what are you talking about? We can go to counseling. We can—" "I do not love you." She had cut me off, her eyes flat and hard as slate. "I never really liked you, John. You are boring. You are always working. And frankly, I deserve better." That was the woman I knew. The cold, calculating strategist who viewed marriage as a transaction. But as I blinked and returned to the present, that woman was gone. In her place was a weeping willow, dabbing her eyes, as Vance described how I supposedly screamed at her for buying the wrong brand of milk. Mr. Rodriguez, my lawyer, a well-meaning but overwhelmed man named David, nudged me. "Focus, John. Keep your face neutral." I tried. I really tried. But the injustice was a bile rising in my throat. Judge Sterling was nodding along to Vance's speech, taking notes. When it was our turn, David stood up, but his defense felt flimsy against the heavy, emotional tapestry Vance had woven. "Your Honor," David said, "Mr. Rodriguez is a dedicated provider. The allegations of financial control are unfounded. The accounts are joint. Mrs. Rodriguez has full access." "Objection," Vance interrupted smoothly. "We have bank statements showing Mr. Rodriguez moved significant sums to a private holding account without her knowledge." "That was a college fund for Leo," I blurted out, unable to stop myself. "Order!" Judge Sterling slammed his gavel, the sound cracking like a gunshot in the enclosed space. He glared at me. "Mr. Rodriguez, you will speak only when spoken to. Another outburst like that and I will hold you in contempt. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," I whispered, my face burning. "The account in question," Vance continued, smirking slightly, "was under the name of a shell company. Hardly a transparent college fund, Your Honor. It was a technicality. I had set it up that way on the advice of my accountant for tax purposes, intending to transfer it to a trust later. But here, in this room, stripped of context, it looked like I was hiding assets. Every piece of evidence I had provided to David, the receipts, the emails, the logs of my time spent with Leo, seemed to dissolve under the acid of Vance's rhetoric. They twisted everything. My late nights at the office were proof of abandonment, not sacrifice. My insistence on checking Leo's homework was framed as controlling behavior. My concern over Elena's late-night outings was labeled paranoid jealousy. I looked over at Elena. She had lowered the tissue for a moment. Her eyes met mine. For a split second, the mask slipped. The corner of her mouth twitched upward, a microscopic smile of triumph. She knew she was winning. She knew the system was designed to protect the person who cried the loudest, and she had perfected the art of the tear. I felt a wave of dizziness. My career as the chief architect at Etheria Systems required me to build virtual realities to create structures that adhered to the laws of physics and logic. But this courtroom was a world without logic. It was a world where up was down, where love was abuse, and where the truth was irrelevant. I was watching 15 years of my life be erased, rewritten by a stranger in a suit who was getting paid $400 an hour to destroy me. I slumped back in my chair, the fight draining out of me. I looked at the judge who was checking his watch. I looked at Vance, who was stacking his papers with the satisfaction of a butcher who has finished his work. And then I looked at Leo. He was still in the back row. The social worker was whispering something to him, probably telling him it would be over soon. But Leo was not listening to her. He was looking at me. His expression had changed. The fear I had seen earlier was gone. In its place was something else, an intensity that seemed too old for his face. He was biting his lower lip, a habit he had when he was solving a complex puzzle or a difficult level in a video game. Our eyes locked. In the midst of the gray, oppressive room, with the rain hammering against the windows and the drone of legal jargon filling the air, my son was the only thing that felt real. He shifted in his seat, his small legs swinging slightly. He tapped the screen of his tablet once. Then he looked back at me and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. It was not a nod of reassurance. It was a signal. He looked anxious, yes, but not in the way a child is anxious about a scolding. He looked like someone standing on the edge of a high diving board, waiting for the whistle to blow. He was vibrating with kinetic energy. I frowned, slightly confused. What was he doing? Why was he clutching that iPad like it was a lifeline? The judge cleared his throat. "Mr. Vance, do you have any witnesses to call?" "Yes, Your Honor," Vance said, his voice dripping with anticipation. "But before we proceed to the character witnesses, we have a significant amount of documentation regarding the defendant's mental instability that we would like to submit." Mental instability. The gaslighting. I knew this was coming. I knew they were going to bring up the times I had lost my keys, the times I had forgotten appointments, the times I had snapped at Leo for no reason, because my head felt like it was filled with cotton. They were going to use the symptoms of the drugs Elena had been slipping me against me. I felt a fresh wave of panic. If they successfully painted me as mentally unfit, I would lose Leo forever. I would be a weekend dad supervised by a court appointee, while Elena and whatever new man she brought into our house raised my son. I looked back at Leo, desperate for some connection, some reason to keep fighting. Leo was not looking at me anymore. He was looking at the judge. He took a deep breath, his small chest expanding. He adjusted his grip on the tablet. He looked ready. The atmosphere in the room was heavy, thick with the smell of wet wool and impending doom. But for the first time since I walked in, I felt a strange prickle on the back of my neck. It was not the cold. It was the distinct electric sensation that the air pressure was about to change. The storm outside was nothing compared to what was brewing in the back row of courtroom 4B. My son was waiting for his moment, and I had the terrifying, exhilarating realization that the trial was not over yet. It was just beginning. As Arthur Vance's voice became a steady, rhythmic drone in the background, a monotonous hum of accusation and fabricated moral superiority. My mind detached itself from the sterile cold of the courtroom. It drifted back, pulling me away from the gray Seattle rain and dropping me into the golden, deceptive glow of 1 year ago. It went back to the time when I still believed I was living the American dream, unaware that I was merely financing my own destruction. It feels like a lifetime ago, but the calendar insists it has only been 12 months. Back then, I viewed myself not as a victim or a tyrant, but as a provider. I was the structural engineer of our family's happiness, or so I told myself. I worked 14 hours a day, sometimes 16, when a deadline at Etheria Systems loomed over the department. I did not do it because I hated my home. I did it because I loved the people inside it too much. I wanted Elena to drive the latest model SUV with the heated leather seats she liked. I wanted Leo to attend the private academy on the east side, the one with the tuition fees that rivaled a university education, because he showed such promise with computers. Every late night at the office, every missed dinner, every weekend spent staring at blueprints rather than a barbecue grill. It was all a deposit into an account I thought we all shared. I remember the exact moment the foundation started to crack, though I was too blind to see it as structural failure at the time. I interpreted it as settling. Elena began to change by degrees. It was subtle at first, like the temperature dropping in a room so slowly you do not realize you are shivering until you see your own breath. The woman who used to greet me with a glass of wine and a question about my day was replaced by a phantom who drifted through the hallways of our 5-bedroom house. She stopped asking about my projects. Instead, she began to curate a list of grievances, reciting them with a sigh that suggested a profound existential weariness. She complained about the silence of the house. She told me she felt like a ghost haunting a museum. "It is too big, John," she would say, her voice echoing in the marble foyer I had paid for. "It is just me and the cleaning lady. I am lonely." I tried to fix it the only way I knew how, by working harder to pay for distractions. I encouraged her to join clubs, to see friends, to shop. I did not realize that her loneliness was a weapon sharpened daily to cut me out of the picture. As my role at Etheria grew, so did the demands on my time. I was put in charge of the virtualization project for a massive downtown redevelopment. It meant travel, 2 days in Chicago, 3 days in New York, a week in Tokyo. I hated the hotel rooms. I hated the empty beds and the room service dinners eaten while scrolling through photos of Leo on my phone. But every time I called home, Elena's voice was clipped distant. "I am busy, John," she would say, the background noise of a restaurant or a party filtering through the line. "I cannot talk right now." When I returned from these trips, exhausted and jet-lagged, desperate for the warmth of my family, I was met with a chill that permeated the walls. The house would be dark. The kitchen would be spotless, devoid of the smells of cooking. It felt less like a home and more like a stage set after the actors had gone home. That was when the evening disappearances began in earnest. It started with therapeutic yoga. Elena claimed her back was bothering her, that the stress of managing the household, a household maintained by a housekeeper and a landscaper, was taking a toll on her physical health. She found a studio on the other side of the city. The classes were conveniently late, usually starting at 7 in the evening and running until 10. "It is for my mental health, John," she said one night, as she adjusted her diamond earrings in the hallway mirror. She was not wearing yoga clothes. She was wearing a black cocktail dress and heels that clicked sharply against the tile. "Do not be so controlling. You are never here anyway." I looked at the dress, then at her face. "You wear that to yoga?" I asked, a laugh bubbling up in my throat, because I thought it was a joke. She did not smile. She looked at me with an expression I could not place then, but I recognize now. It was disdain. We go out for drinks afterward, the group. It is a support network, something you would not understand since you have no friends. Then, there were the charity galas, the silent auctions, the planning committees for events I never saw an invitation for. I sat at home reheating leftovers, telling myself that I should be happy she was finding fulfillment. I was so desperate to be the supportive husband that I actively suppressed the voice in my head, screaming that something was wrong. I gaslit myself before she even had the chance to do it for me. But the most painful fracture, the one that still keeps me awake at night, was Leo. My son used to be my shadow. When he was 5, he would wait by the door with a baseball glove or a box of Legos, vibrating with excitement, the moment he heard my car pull into the driveway. We built cities together. We tossed a ball in the backyard until the sun went down. But over the last year, Leo vanished. I would come home to find the living room empty. I would go up to his room and find the door shut. When I knocked, there would be a long pause before he answered. Inside the room would be dark, illuminated only by the blue glow of his screens. He would be sitting on his bed, headphones on, typing furiously, or watching videos. "Hey, buddy," I would say, trying to inject a cheerfulness I did not feel into my voice. "Want to grab some pizza? Maybe toss the ball." He would look up and the light in his eyes was gone. He looked tired. He looked guarded. "No, thanks, Dad. I am busy." "Busy with what?" I would ask, stepping closer. He would quickly minimize the window on his tablet or turn the screen off entirely. "Just stuff. School stuff." I blamed myself. I thought I had broken our bond by being absent. I told myself that this was natural, that 8-year-old boys grow out of their fathers, that he preferred the digital world to the real one, because I had failed to make the real one interesting enough. I stood in the doorway of his room watching the back of his head, feeling a crushing weight of guilt. I did not know then that he was retreating not because he didn't love me, but because he was trying to survive in a house that had become a battlefield. He was too young to understand. I did not know that his mother was slowly dripping poison into his ear every day while I was at the office. "Daddy doesn't want to play with you," she must have told him. "Daddy loves his work more than us." The guilt was a heavy blanket I wore everywhere. I worked harder to buy his affection back. I bought him the new tablet. I bought him the coding software. I bought him everything except the one thing he actually needed: my presence to protect him from her. The breaking point, the moment the crack became a chasm, was the Etheria Systems Christmas party 2 months ago. It was the highlight of the social calendar for our firm. We rented out the top floor of a luxury hotel downtown. There was an ice sculpture, a live jazz band, and 300 guests dressed in black tie. I was proud that night. I was up for an award for the virtualization project. I wanted Elena by my side. I wanted to show her off, to show her that all the late nights and the travel had been for something tangible, something we could celebrate together. Elena agreed to come, but only after I bought her a gown that cost $4,000. It was a shimmering emerald green silk dress that clung to her figure. She looked breathtaking. When she walked into the room, heads turned. I felt a surge of pride. That is my wife, I thought. But as soon as we entered the ballroom, she physically distanced herself from me. When I tried to take her hand, she pulled away, as if my skin were made of sandpaper. "Don't wrinkle the silk, John," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. I tried to introduce her to the CEO, to my partners. She smiled, shook hands, and played the part of the charming spouse perfectly. But the moment their backs were turned, her face fell into a mask of boredom and irritation. Then came the photographer. The firm had hired a professional photographer to take portraits of the senior staff and their partners against the backdrop of the city lights. I saw the setup and touched Elena's elbow. "Come on," I said, smiling. "Let's get a picture. The view is amazing." She stopped dead in the middle of the room. People were watching. She looked at the camera, then she looked at me. And in that moment, under the crystal chandeliers, she did not bother to hide it. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated loathing. It was not annoyance. It was not fatigue. It was the look one gives to a disgusting insect they found on their shoe. "No," she said. The word was flat final. "Elena, please," I whispered, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. "Everyone is taking photos. It will only take a second." "I said no," she said louder this time. "I do not want a picture with you, John. I do not want to pretend that I am happy standing next to you." She turned on her heel and walked away, heading toward the bar. I was left standing there, my hands still half raised, while my colleagues pretended not to notice the humiliation burning on my face. I stood alone in my tuxedo, surrounded by laughter and music, and felt a profound, terrifying isolation. I watched her across the room for the rest of the night. She was laughing with strangers. She was radiant. She was alive. But every time her eyes swept past me, they went dead. That night, on the silent ride home, I stared out the window at the passing streetlights and realized with a sickening clarity that my marriage was not just struggling. It was dead. I just didn't know yet that she wasn't mourning it. She was planning the funeral, and she intended to bury me alive along with it. I sat in the dark of the limousine, listening to her text someone on her phone, the frantic, rapid-fire tapping of thumbs on glass, and I felt the first true stirrings of fear. Who was she texting at 1 a.m? Why was she smiling at the screen in a way she hadn't smiled at me in 5 years? I should have taken her phone then. I should have demanded answers. But I was too tired, too beaten down, and too afraid of the answer. So I closed my eyes and let the car carry me toward the disaster that was waiting for me, unaware that the countdown had already begun. The air in the courtroom shifted from cold to suffocating as Arthur Vance stood up, adjusting his silk tie with the slow, deliberate movements of an executioner preparing his tools. He did not look at me. He looked at Judge Sterling, his expression a perfect blend of professional concern and reluctance, as if what he was about to do pained him deeply. "Your Honor," Vance began, his voice dropping an octave to a register of somber gravity. "We have established the financial irregularities, but money can be repaid. What cannot be undone is the damage caused by a man who has lost his grip on reality. We are submitting Exhibit C, a transcript of digital communications between the defendant and my client over the past 6 months." My stomach turned over. I knew those texts. I had sent them. But as the bailiff handed the papers to the judge and my lawyer, I saw the context had been surgically removed. Vance read aloud, his voice echoing in the silent room. "Timestamp, 2:14 in the morning. Defendant, where are you? I know you are not at the studio. Why are you lying to me? Who is he? I can hear you laughing. Timestamp, 3:30 in the morning. Defendant, pick up the phone, Elena. I am going to find you. Do not think I won't." He paused, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. "Your Honor, these are not the messages of a concerned husband. These are the ravings of a man in the grip of paranoid delusion. A man who stalks his wife, who threatens her, who stays awake until dawn inventing scenarios of betrayal that do not exist." I gripped the arms of my chair so hard, my knuckles turned white. "That is out of context," I hissed to David, my lawyer. "She wasn't answering her phone. It had been hours. I was worried she had been in an accident." David put a hand on my forearm, silencing me. "Let them finish, John. If we interrupt you, look unstable." Unstable. That word was the keystone of their entire strategy. And as I sat there listening to Vance paint me as a jealous lunatic, the terrifying realization washed over me. I had helped them paint this picture. I had provided the canvas, the brush, and the paint, all while thinking I was the one losing my mind. My memory violently rewound to 6 months ago. The summer of fog, I called it in my head. It started with the vitamins. Elena had become suddenly solicitous about my health. "You are working too hard, John," she had said, her voice tender, placing a small glass dish of supplements next to my morning coffee. "You look gray. I bought you these. High-potency B-complex and magnesium. They will help with the stress." I was touched. After months of cold shoulders and silence, this felt like an olive branch. I took them religiously every morning. Within a week, the fog rolled in. I would arrive at Etheria Systems and stare at my dual monitors for 20 minutes, unable to comprehend the blueprints I had drawn the day before. My focus, usually razor-sharp, became scattered. I felt a constant low-level lethargy, a heaviness in my limbs that coffee couldn't touch. Then came the irritability. I would snap at my junior architects for minor errors. I would come home and explode because the mail wasn't on the counter. And Elena was always there, watching, her eyes wide with feigned fear. "John, you are shouting again," she would whisper, backing away. "You are scaring Leo." "I'm not shouting," I would yell, my voice booming in my own ears. And then I would stop, horrified. Was I shouting? The physical world began to betray me. I would leave my car keys in the bowl by the door. I knew I put them there, only to find them in the refrigerator 2 hours later. I would put important project files in my briefcase, drive to the office, and find the briefcase empty. "I swear I put them in there," I told Elena one evening, tearing the living room apart, looking for the deed to the house which had mysteriously vanished from the safe. She stood by the fireplace, shaking her head sadly. "John, you are doing it again. You are misremembering. I saw you leave the files on the dining table. You were talking to yourself. You looked manic." "I was not talking to myself." "You were," she insisted, her voice calm, reasonable. "You were muttering about the walls closing in. John, I am worried about you. Really worried." The doubt began to seep in like groundwater into a cracked foundation. Maybe she was right. I was under immense pressure at work. Maybe the stress was causing early-onset dementia. Maybe I was cracking up. She capitalized on my vulnerability with the precision of a surgeon. "I have a friend," she said one night, rubbing my back as I sat with my head in my hands. "Dr. Aris. He is a specialist in executive burnout. Please, John, just for me, go see him." I went. Dr. Aris operated out of a sleek private office in Bellevue. He was a man with a soothing voice and a notepad he never seemed to look at. I poured my heart out to him. I told him about the memory lapses, the rage, the suspicion that my wife was drifting away. I did not know then that Dr. Aris was not a licensed psychiatrist. He was a life coach with a suspended counseling license who played golf with Elena's father. I did not know that every word I said, every admission of weakness was being recorded and fed back to Elena to refine her torture. "It sounds like classic paranoid ideation," Dr. Aris had told me, nodding gravely. "You are projecting your professional insecurities onto your marriage. You are inventing a villain because you cannot handle your own failure." He prescribed rest and disengagement. He told me to stop asking Elena where she went. He told me my suspicions were symptoms of my illness, and I believed him. I stopped asking questions. When Elena went out at 7 in the evening for yoga, I forced myself to sit on the couch, swallowing the bile of jealousy, telling myself, "It is in your head, John. It is the sickness." But there was one person who tried to pull me out of the matrix. One person who saw the glitch. Leo. I remember a Saturday afternoon about 2 months before the divorce filing. I was in the kitchen, frantically looking for my wallet. It had been on the counter. I knew it. Now it was gone. Leo was sitting at the island eating cereal. He watched me overturn a stack of mail. "Dad?" he asked quietly. "Not now, Leo," I snapped, sweat beading on my forehead. I can't find my wallet. I'm going to be late for the meeting. Mom put it in the trash, Leo said. I froze. I turned to look at him. What did you say? Mom, he repeated, not looking up from his bowl. She put it in the trash can, under the coffee grounds. I walked over to the trash compactor. I pulled out the bin. There, buried under a filter full of wet coffee grounds, was my leather wallet. I stared at it, my brain short-circuiting. Why would she do that? Leo, I said, my voice trembling. Are you sure? I saw her, he said. Then he looked up, and for the first time I saw the fear in his eyes. Not fear of me, fear for me. And Dad? She doesn't go to yoga. What do you mean? She goes to the parking lot at the mall. A blue car picks her up. A man drives it. My heart hammered against my ribs. The fog lifted for a split second. A man. A blue car. The trash. Just then, Elena walked in. She must have been listening from the hallway. Leo! She exclaimed, rushing over and hugging him effectively, silencing him. Oh, honey, stop making up stories. You know what Dr. Aris said about your imagination. She looked at me, her eyes wide with that fake concern. John, he's been doing this all week, making up wild stories to get attention because you're never here. It is a cry for help. She looked at the wallet in my hand. Oh my God, John, did you throw your wallet away? See? This is what I mean. You are getting worse. I looked at the wallet. I looked at Leo, who was now staring down at his lap, defeated. And in that moment of weakness, manipulated by the chemicals in my bloodstream and the gaslighting of months, I chose the wrong side. Leo, I said sternly, do not lie to me. Lying is wrong. Leo didn't say anything. He just slid off his chair and walked out of the room. That small, slumped back haunted me. I had chosen the illusion over the truth-teller. Back in the courtroom, Vance was now detailing the isolation phase. Mr. Rodriguez became so volatile, Vance said, that he alienated everyone. He stopped attending family gatherings. He was rude to their friends. Mrs. Rodriguez was forced to cover for him, to make excuses to protect his dignity. Lies. All lies. I hadn't stopped attending gatherings. Elena had stopped telling me about them. Oh, the dinner with the Petersons, she would say, when I asked why the calendar was blank. They canceled, honey. They said they felt uncomfortable around you last time. You were staring at the wall and mumbling. I hadn't been mumbling. I had been tired. But she told them I was drunk. She told my sister I was having a midlife crisis and didn't want to be disturbed. She told my colleagues I was working through some personal issues. She built a cage of silence around me. She cut the phone lines, metaphorically speaking, so that when I finally did scream for help, there was no one left to hear it. Vance picked up a thick document. Your Honor, based on the defendant's erratic behavior, the paranoia, the memory loss, and the aggressive outburst, we have a preliminary evaluation from Dr. Aris suggesting Mr. Rodriguez is suffering from a severe personality disorder with paranoid features. We argue that he is unfit to have custody of a minor child. We also argue that his mental state renders him incompetent to manage the complex assets of the marital estate. Mrs. Rodriguez is requesting full power of attorney over the family trust to ensure the child's future is not squandered by a man in the midst of a psychological breakdown. There it was, the end game. It wasn't just about the divorce. It wasn't just about the house. It was a complete hostile takeover of my life. She didn't just want to leave me. She wanted to invalidate me. If I was declared mentally incompetent, she got everything. The stocks, the savings, the house, and total control over Leo. She would pack me off to a facility or leave me in a studio apartment with a court-appointed guardian while she lived the high life with her lover on my dime. The text messages, the misplaced keys, the vitamins that were likely sedatives or mild hallucinogens. It was all a carefully orchestrated campaign to build this very moment. She had been writing this script for a year, and I had been reciting my lines perfectly. I looked at Elena. She wasn't crying anymore. She was looking down at her hands, but I could see the tension in her jaw. She was waiting for the gavel to bang. She was waiting for the victory. I felt a surge of nausea. I looked at the judge. He was reading the transcript of the texts, his brow furrowed. He looked up at me and his eyes were hard. He believed it. Why wouldn't he? The evidence was overwhelming. A crazy husband, a suffering wife, a frightened child. It was a story as old as time. But then the air pressure changed again. Leo. I turned my head. Leo was not looking at the judge anymore. He was looking at his tablet. His finger hovered over the screen. He wasn't playing a game. He was waiting. He looked up and caught my eye. And in that glance I saw the forgiveness I didn't deserve. I saw the boy who had tried to tell me about the trash can, the boy I had silenced. He wasn't silenced now. Vance finished his speech. We rest our argument regarding the defendant's mental capacity, Your Honor. Judge Sterling nodded. Thank you, Mr. Vance. Mr. Rodriguez's counsel, do you have a response? David stood up, but before he could speak, a small, clear voice cut through the heavy atmosphere of the courtroom like a laser beam. Excuse me, Judge? It was not a lawyer. It was not a witness. It was Leo. He had stood up. He was so small that his head barely cleared the top of the wooden bench in front of him. But he stood straight, clutching that dirty crumb-encrusted iPad with both hands. The social worker tried to pull him back down. Leo, honey, sit down. He shook her off. No, I need to speak. Judge Sterling looked over his glasses surprised. Young man, you are not supposed to speak right now. I have to, Leo said. His voice trembled slightly, but then it steadied. Because they are lying. My dad isn't crazy, and he didn't send those texts. The silence that followed was absolute. Vance froze. Elena's head snapped up her eyes, widening in genuine shock. Leo, she hissed a sharp warning sound. Sit down immediately. No, Mom, Leo said, turning to look at her. And for the first time I saw it. The realization in Elena's eyes that she had made a fatal error. She had underestimated the one person in the house she deemed invisible. She had assumed that because he was a child he was blind. But Leo had been watching. He had been listening. And most importantly, he had been recording. I have proof, Leo said, lifting the iPad. I have proof of everything. The gaslighting was over. The fog was about to clear, and the storm was about to break. The silence that followed Leo's declaration was brittle, like a sheet of ice, moments before it shatters underfoot. For a heartbeat, the entire courtroom was suspended in the vacuum of my son's words. I have proof. But the legal system is a machine, and machines do not like interruptions. Judge Sterling slammed his gavel down the sound, violent enough to make the water in the pitcher on his desk tremble. Order! He bellowed, his face flushing a deep, angry red. This courtroom is not a playground. Madam, control your charge, or I will have the bailiff remove him immediately. The social worker, looking terrified, grabbed Leo by the shoulders and physically pulled him back into the seat. Sit down, Leo, she whispered frantically. Please just be quiet. Leo sat, but he did not shrink. He clutched the iPad to his chest, his jaw set in a line of stubborn defiance that mirrored my own father's. He looked at me, his eyes urgent, telegraphing a message I could not yet decode. Wait, his eyes seemed to say. Just wait. Mr. Vance, having recovered his composure, with the slick speed of a reptile, cleared his throat. He sensed that the momentum was slipping, that the emotional weight of a child defending his father could sway the judge's subconscious. He needed a kill shot. He needed to bury me under so much mud that Leo's voice would be drowned out. Your Honor, Vance said, his voice regaining its oily confidence. We apologize for the outburst. It is clear the child is acting out under significant stress, likely coached by the defendant during their unsupervised visitations. But, to put the matter of Mr. Rodriguez's character to rest, and to explain exactly where the marital funds have gone, I call my final witness, a man who has known the defendant professionally and personally for over a decade. I call Carter Bennett to the stand. The name hit me like a physical blow to the solar plexus. Carter. My head snapped toward the double doors at the back of the room. They swung open, and Carter Bennett walked in. He was wearing a charcoal suit that I knew cost more than my first car. He walked with a confident, easy stride, the kind of walk that opens doors in boardrooms and country clubs. My breath caught in my throat. Carter was my friend. We had started at Etheria Systems together 15 years ago as junior draftsmen. We had survived the grueling hours of our internship side by side. I was the best man at his first wedding. He was one of the few people I had confided in when things with Elena started to get rocky. He had left Etheria 2 years ago to start a high-end financial consulting firm, but we still played golf once a month. Why was he here? Why was he walking toward the witness stand without looking at me? "State your name and occupation for the record," the clerk droned. "Carter James Bennett," he said, his voice smooth and projecting perfectly to the back of the room. "I am the founder and principal consultant at Horizon Financial Strategies." Vance approached him, smiling like a man welcoming an old friend. "Mr. Bennett, thank you for coming. You know the defendant, John Rodriguez?" "I do," Carter said. He finally looked at me. His face was a mask of sorrowful regret, a performance so convincing it made my skin crawl. "We were best friends for 15 years. "Where?" Vance asked. "I had to distance myself," Carter said, sighing. I could no longer stand by and watch what he was doing. "And what was he doing, Mr. Bennett?" Carter straightened his tie. "About 14 months ago, John came to me. He was frantic. He told me he needed to move some money, liquidate some assets. He wanted to do it quietly without his wife knowing." "Did he tell you why?" "Yes," Carter said. He paused for effect, looking directly at the judge. "He said he was in love. He said he had met a woman, a young intern at Etheria, and he needed cash to set her up in an apartment in Belltown. He called it his escape plan. He told me he was going to bleed his family accounts dry, hide the money in cryptocurrency and offshore shells, and then leave Elena with nothing." I shot out of my chair. "You liar!" I screamed. The sound tore out of my throat before I could stop it. "Carter, you son of a bitch! I never said that." "Sit down, Mr. Rodriguez," Judge Sterling roared. "One more word and I will hold you in contempt and have you thrown in a cell." David yanked me back down, his grip painful on my arm. "John, shut up," he hissed, his face pale. "You are digging your own grave." I sat trembling with a rage so pure it felt like it was burning my blood. Carter was lying. Every word was a fabrication. I had never had an affair. I had never stolen a dime. "Continue, Mr. Bennett," Vance said, looking at me with disdain. "I refused to help him launder the money," Carter continued, his voice steady. "But I know he found a way. I saw the spreadsheets he left on his desk once. He was diverting funds from the Etheria virtualization project, funds meant for contractors, into his personal use. He bragged about it. He said Elena was too stupid to notice the missing money, and that he deserved it for being the genius behind the company." The room spun. This was not just a character assassination. This was a criminal accusation. Embezzlement. Fraud. If this testimony stood, I would not just lose my son. I would lose my job, my license to practice architecture, and likely my freedom. I would go to federal prison. I looked at Elena. She was sitting perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. But she was not looking at the floor anymore. She was looking at Carter. And then it happened. A micro-expression. A split second of communication that screamed louder than any shout. Carter looked down from the stand. He caught Elena's eye. The corner of his mouth twitched, a tiny, arrogant smirk. Elena's eyes softened, and she gave a barely perceptible nod, her lips parting slightly. It was a look of intimacy. It was the look of two people who share a bed, who share secrets, who share a life. The puzzle pieces in my mind slammed together with a deafening crash. The financial consultant Elena had been seeing for the last year to manage her inheritance. The yoga classes that ended at 10 at night. The way Elena suddenly knew so much about my project deadlines and the internal politics at Etheria. It was Carter. It had been Carter all along. The nausea hit me in a wave. My best friend. The man I had bought beers for. The man who had patted my back and told me to hang in there when I complained about my marriage. He wasn't just sleeping with my wife. He was colluding with her to frame me. The brutality of the plan was breathtaking. They weren't just running away together. They wanted to strip me of everything first. Carter wanted my wife. He wanted my stock options in Etheria, which, if I was convicted of embezzlement, would likely be forfeited or transferred as part of the settlement. He wanted to destroy his professional rival and take his personal life in one fell swoop. He told me, Carter said, twisting the knife, that Elena was a burden, that she was aging poorly, that he needed someone fresh. The irony was sickening. They were projecting their own sins onto me. They were the ones having the affair. They were the ones stealing money. They were the ones lying. I looked at the judge. Sterling was taking copious notes, his face grim. He believed it. Why wouldn't he? Carter was a respected financial expert. His testimony corroborated the erratic behavior and the financial secrecy Vance had established. It was a perfect circle of lies. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett," Vance said softly. "No further questions." David stood up to cross-examine, but he looked defeated. "Mr. Bennett," he stammered, "do you have any physical proof of these conversations? Any recordings? Emails?" "John was careful," Carter said smoothly. "He insisted on talking in person. He said technology leaves a trail, which is why he was so paranoid about his wife seeing his phone. It was a masterstroke. He used my paranoia, which they had manufactured with gaslighting, to explain the lack of evidence for his lies." "I have no further questions," David said, sinking back into his chair. He leaned toward me. "John, this is bad. This is really, really bad. We might have to settle. Give them what they want to avoid a criminal investigation." "No," I whispered, my voice raspy. "I did not do it." "It does not matter what you did," David said. "It matters what they can prove. And right now you look like a monster." I felt a hollow sensation in my chest, the feeling of a man falling from a great height. I looked around the room. The bailiff looked at me with disgust. The court reporter typed furiously. The windows were still weeping rain against the gray Seattle sky. I was going to lose. I was going to lose Leo. I turned my head slowly to look at the back row. Leo. My son was sitting on the edge of his seat. He was watching Carter with an expression of intense concentration. He wasn't crying. He wasn't scared. He looked angry. He looked at Carter. Then he looked at Elena. And then he looked at me. He saw the despair on my face. He saw his father crumbling. Leo's hands tightened on the iPad. He looked down at the screen, then back up at Judge Sterling. The judge was organizing his papers, preparing to make a ruling that would end my life as I knew it. Leo did not wait for permission this time. He did not ask the social worker. He did not raise his hand like a schoolboy. He stood up on the bench, making himself taller, visible over the heads of the lawyers. "He is lying!" Leo shouted. The voice was high and clear, cutting through the murmurs of the courtroom. Judge Sterling looked up, his patience finally snapping. "Young man, I warned you!" "He is lying!" Leo yelled again, pointing a small finger directly at Carter. "That man is lying! He was not at his office! He was at our house!" "Bailiff!" the judge barked. "Remove the child!" The bailiff, a burly man with a belt full of equipment, started moving toward the back row. "No!" Leo screamed, scrambling over the bench, dodging the social worker's grasping hands. He ran into the aisle. "You have to look! You have to look at the tablet!" "Leo, stop!" Elena shrieked, half rising from her seat. Her composure cracked. She sounded frantic. "Don't you dare!" Leo ignored her. He ran down the center aisle, his small dress shoes slapping against the old wood floor. The bailiff was closing in, but Leo was faster, fueled by adrenaline and desperation. He wasn't running to me. He was running to the clerk's desk, where the audio-visual inputs for the courtroom displays were located. "Get him!" Vance shouted, pointing. "He is disrupting the court." I stood up, instinct taking over. "Don't touch him!" I roared at the bailiff. "Do not touch my son!" Leo reached the clerk's station. He was small, but he knew technology better than anyone in the room. He slammed the iPad onto the desk and grabbed the HDMI cable that had been used for Vance's PowerPoint earlier. "Officer!" Judge Sterling shouted. "Restrain him!" The bailiff lunged, grabbing Leo by the back of his jacket. "Just watch!" Leo screamed, tears finally bursting from his eyes as he was yanked backward. But his hand was still on the cable. With one final, desperate yank, he jammed the connector into the side of his iPad. The courtroom's massive projection screen, which had been black, suddenly flickered to life. A mirror image of Leo's iPad screen appeared. It was a file directory. The folder was named Evidence. The bailiff froze, looking at the judge. The judge looked at the screen. The entire room went silent. "Let him go," Judge Sterling said quietly. His voice was curious now. The sheer audacity of the boy had bought him 5 seconds of grace. Leo pulled his jacket free from the bailiff's loose grip. He tapped the screen. "This," Leo said, his voice shaking, but loud, "is who Carter really is." The moment Leo tapped the screen, the courtroom did not explode into chaos immediately. Instead, it fell into a stunned, breathless vacuum. The large projection screen, which had been a dormant black square on the wall, washed the room in the harsh, blue-white light of a file directory. The word "Evidence" hovered there, magnified to the size of a billboard, glowing with a terrifying promise. Judge Sterling, who had been halfway out of his chair to order the bailiff to seize my son, froze. His gavel remained suspended in the air. The sheer audacity of the act, the sudden technological intrusion into his analog domain, seemed to short-circuit his judicial reflexes. "Hold it!" Vance roared, breaking the spell. He lunged toward the clerk's desk, his face a mask of panic that he failed to disguise as professional outrage. "Objection! This is highly irregular. This is an ambush. Turn that off immediately." The bailiff, confused by the conflicting momentum of the room, hesitated. He looked at the judge, then at Vance, and finally at the small boy standing defiantly by the HDMI cable. "Pause that video!" Judge Sterling barked, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. "Nobody plays anything until I say so." Bailiff stepped back. "Mr. Vance, sit down." The room was vibrating with tension. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that seemed to sync with the flashing cursor on the screen. I wanted to run to Leo to scoop him up and shield him from the sharks circling him, but I knew that if I moved, I would validate Vance's narrative that I was the puppet master. I had to stay glued to my chair, my hands gripping the armrests so tightly that the wood creaked. Leo did not flinch. He did not look at the angry lawyer or the imposing judge. He stood by the clerk's desk, his hand resting protectively on his iPad. He looked so small in his Sunday suit, yet in that moment, he seemed like the tallest person in the room. "Young man," Judge Sterling said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low rumble, "you have exactly 10 seconds to explain to me why you have hijacked my courtroom before I hold your father in contempt and have you removed by force." "It is not my dad's fault," Leo said. His voice was not the voice of a child anymore. It was clear, steady, and laced with a profound, heartbreaking seriousness. "My dad did not tell me to do this. My dad does not even know about the videos." "Lies!" Vance shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Your Honor, this is a clear case of parental alienation and manipulation. Look at the defendant. He has coached the boy. He has brainwashed him into disrupting these proceedings because he knows he has lost. This is psychological abuse, plain and simple." "I am not brainwashed," Leo's voice cut through Vance's bluster like a knife. He turned to face the lawyer, his chin lifted. "And my dad is not crazy. He is not a thief. And he did not send those texts," the gallery murmured. I saw the court reporter's fingers flying across her stenotype machine, struggling to keep up. "That is enough," Judge Sterling said, holding up a hand. He looked at Leo with a scrutiny that made me hold my breath. The judge was a grandfather. I had read that in his bio. Perhaps beneath the robes and the gruff exterior, he recognized the difference between a rehearsed script and the desperate truth of a child. "You say you have proof, son? What kind of proof?" "I know the truth because I am the one who fixes the computers," Leo stated simply. Judge Sterling blinked. "You fix the computers?" "Yes, sir," Leo said. "Mom is not good with technology. She always downloads viruses. She clicks on things she should not. Last year, she said her laptop and her phone were acting weird. She said they were slow. She told me to fix them." I watched Elena. She had gone pale, her skin taking on the color of old parchment. She was gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles white. She leaned forward, her voice a sharp, desperate hiss that carried across the quiet room. "Leo," she whispered, a sound like escaping steam. "Leo, baby, stop this right now. You are confused. You are tired. Put the tablet away and come to mommy." Leo did not turn to look at her. He did not even acknowledge her voice. It was as if she had ceased to exist for him. The rejection was absolute, and in its own way, devastating. It was the severing of a bond that should have been unbreakable. "I am not confused," Leo said to the judge. "When I fixed her tablet, she kept complaining that it would crash when she was on calls. So I installed a background diagnostic tool. It is a program that records screen activity and audio logs so I can see what causes the crash." My jaw dropped slightly. I knew Leo was bright. He had been coding in Python since he was 6, but I had no idea he was capable of this level of foresight. Or perhaps it was not foresight. Perhaps it was just the diligence of a boy who wanted to be useful, who wanted to please a mother who could never be pleased. "She told me to keep it running," Leo continued, his voice unwavering. "She said she did not want to miss any important calls if the machine broke. She said, 'Make sure it works, Leo.' So I did. I set it to auto-record whenever the device was active." He paused, and for a second his composure faltered. A flicker of pain crossed his face, reminding us all that he was only 8 years old. "She forgot to turn it off. She forgot it was there. She thought I was just playing games." The implication hung heavy in the air. Elena had underestimated him. She had viewed him as a prop, a nuisance, or a tech support specialist, but never as a sentient being capable of understanding the world she was hiding. She had conducted her affair, her conspiracy, and her destruction of our family right in front of the device she had handed to her son to fix. "This is illegal wiretapping," Vance shouted, grasping at straws. "Your Honor, this evidence, if it even exists, was obtained without consent. It is inadmissible. It is a violation of my client's privacy rights under Washington state law." Judge Sterling looked at Vance with a look of withering scorn. "Mr. Vance, if I understand the boy correctly, his mother asked him to service the device. She gave him access. And if the recording was inadvertent, due to her failure to terminate the program she authorized, your argument is on very thin ice. Furthermore, in family court, when the welfare of a child is at stake, and there are allegations of criminal fraud and perjury, I have wide discretion to hear whatever I deem relevant." The judge turned back to Leo. The harsh lines of his face had softened. He looked at the boy not as a nuisance, but as the only person in the room who didn't have an angle. "You said you have videos," Judge Sterling said softly. "What do these videos show, Leo?" "They show everything," Leo said. "They show what Mom and Mr. Carter do when Dad is at work. They show how they plan to make Dad look sick. They show where the money really went." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. I felt tears pricking my eyes. Not tears of sadness, but tears of overwhelming relief and pride. My son was saving me. After months of me failing to protect him, he was standing in the gap for me. "I want to see it," Judge Sterling said firmly. "Your Honor," Vance protested again, desperation creeping into his voice. "I must object in the strongest possible terms. We have no way of verifying the authenticity of these files. They could be deep fakes. The defendant is a computer architect. He could have fabricated this." "My dad didn't make these," Leo shouted, his anger flaring again. "I made them. And if you don't believe me, look at the timestamps. Look at the metadata. I can show you the source code." Judge Sterling silenced Vance with a sharp chop of his hand. "Mr. Vance, sit down and be quiet. If this is a fabrication, the metadata will prove it, and your client will be vindicated. But if you try to obstruct this child one more time, I will have you removed from my courtroom. Do I make myself clear?" Vance sank back into his chair, defeated. He looked at Elena. She was staring at the screen, her eyes wide with a terror so raw, it was almost hard to watch. She knew. She knew exactly what was on that hard drive. Carter, sitting in the witness stand, looked like he was about to vomit. He loosened his tie, sweat glistening on his forehead under the courtroom lights. "Proceed, son," Judge Sterling said to Leo. "Connect it. Let us see." Leo nodded. He turned back to the clerk's desk. He tapped the screen of his iPad, navigating through the file structure with practiced ease. The image on the big screen mirrored his movements. We saw a folder labeled Logs _2025. Inside, there were hundreds of files. Leo scrolled down. He didn't pick a random file. He picked one marked with a star. "This one," Leo said, his voice quiet, now almost a whisper. "This was 3 months ago. The day Dad came home early, and Mom said she was at the gym." I held my breath. The air in the room felt solid like concrete. Every eye was fixed on the screen. The court reporter stopped typing. The bailiff stood with his arms crossed, watching. Even the rain outside seemed to pause. Leo's small finger hovered over the play icon. I looked at him silently, begging him to know how much I loved him, how sorry I was that he had to be the one to do this. He looked up at me one last time before he pressed the button. His eyes were dry now. He looked like a soldier detonating a bridge to stop an advancing army. He was burning down his own childhood to save his father. "I am sorry, Mom," Leo whispered, though only those of us in the front row heard it. Then he pressed the glass. The triangle on the screen turned from a pause symbol to 2 vertical lines. The static on the screen cleared. The audio speakers above us crackled to life. And the truth began to play. The screen flickered once, a burst of digital static that quickly resolved into a high-definition image, so crisp it felt like a window had been punched through the courtroom wall, leading directly back into the hell I had been living in, without knowing it. The timestamp in the bottom right corner of the projection burned in bright white font. October 15th, 8:42 in the evening. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. October 15th. I remembered that date with painful clarity. I had been in Chicago, sitting in a lonely hotel room, staring at a room service burger I had no appetite for, while frantically texting Elena to apologize for missing dinner. I had felt guilty that night. I had felt like a failure of a husband for being 2,000 miles away while my wife was home alone. But the video showed that Elena was not alone, at least not spiritually. The camera angle was wide, capturing the entirety of our living room. It was obviously filmed from the tablet's camera, which had been propped up on the kitchen island, facing the seating area. The lighting was low, intimate, the kind of ambiance Elena always claimed gave her a headache when I tried to set a romantic mood. But here, the room was bathed in the warm, golden glow of the fireplace. And there she was. The woman on the screen was not the fragile, trembling victim sitting at the plaintiff's table. She was not the weeping mother who had just spent an hour dabbing her eyes with a tissue. The Elena on the screen was vibrant, sharp, and terrifyingly relaxed. She was lounging on the Italian leather sofa, the one she strictly forbade Leo from sitting on, with her feet propped up on the coffee table. She was wearing a silk robe that slipped off one shoulder, and in her hand she held a large crystal glass filled with a dark red liquid. I recognized the bottle sitting on the table next to her feet. It was a Chateau Margaux I had been saving for our 15th anniversary. It was a bottle that cost more than my first car. She had opened it, and she was drinking it like it was cheap table wine. But it was the sound that sucked the air out of the courtroom. Elena was laughing. It was a throaty, cruel sound that I hadn't heard in years. Her phone was lying on the table next to the wine bottle, the speakerphone engaged. The audio quality recorded by Leo's diagnostic tool was impeccable. Every scratch in the voice on the other end was audible. "So," the voice on the phone said. It was deep, smooth, and sickeningly familiar. It was Carter Bennett. "Did the old man sign the papers before he left for the airport?" "Of course he did," Elena replied, taking a long sip of the wine. She swirled the glass, watching the red liquid coat the sides. "He trusts me, Carter. It is pathetic, really. I told him it was a supplemental insurance policy for Leo. Something about protecting his tuition in case anything happened to John while he was traveling. He didn't even read the fine print. He just looked at me with those big, sad puppy dog eyes and signed on the dotted line." The courtroom let out a collective, involuntary gasp. It was a sound of pure shock. Beside me, my lawyer David stiffened. "Power of attorney," David whispered, his pen freezing over his notepad. "She got you to sign a power of attorney disguised as insurance." On the screen, Carter laughed. "God, he is an idiot. A brilliant architect, sure. But when it comes to people, he is blind." "He is not blind," Elena corrected him, her voice dripping with disdain. "He is just weak. He thinks if he works hard enough and buys me enough things, I will suddenly start loving him again. He has no idea that every time he touches me, my skin crawls." I felt a physical pain in my chest, sharp and agonizing, as if a rib had just snapped. I had spent years blaming myself for the distance between us. I had spent thousands of dollars on therapy, on vacations, on gifts, thinking I was the problem. Hearing her say it, hearing her admit that my affection repulsed her, was a level of cruelty I was not prepared for. "Well," Carter said, "once we execute that document, his weakness is our payday. Did you find the deed?" "It is in the safe," Elena said. She reached out and picked up a nail file, casually working on her manicure, while discussing the destruction of my life. "I have the deed, the birth certificates, and the life insurance policies. Once the divorce is finalized, and once we prove he is mentally incompetent, I get control of the trust. That is 60% of his Etheria stock, Carter. Do you have any idea how much that is worth?" "I have a rough idea," Carter purred. "Enough to get us that villa in Tuscany we talked about." "And more," Elena said, smiling a smile that looked demonic in the firelight. "I am going to strip him clean, Carter. I want the house. I want the car. I want the stocks. I want him to end up in a studio apartment in the bad part of town wondering where it all went wrong. I want to break him." The malice in her voice was so concentrated, so pure, that Judge Sterling actually leaned forward, his glasses sliding down his nose. He looked from the screen to the real Elena sitting in the courtroom. The real Elena was no longer crying. The facade had shattered completely. She was staring at the screen with her mouth slightly open, her face draining of blood, until she looked like a wax figure. She knew there was no spinning this. There was no context that could explain away the phrase, "I want to strip him clean." But the video was not done. "What about the cash?" Carter asked on the recording. "Did he ever suspect you were skimming from the household accounts?" "Please," Elena scoffed. "John doesn't look at bank statements. He just pays the bills. For the last 3 years, every time he gave me $5,000 for groceries or home repairs, I took $2,000 and put it away. He thinks inflation is just really bad." "Smart girl," Carter said. "How much do we have?" Elena set the wine glass down and leaned toward the phone, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that boomed through the courtroom speakers. I have accumulated nearly $200,000 in cash, she said. It is not in the bank, obviously. I am not stupid. If it was in the bank, the lawyers would find it. Where is it? Carter asked. It is in the garage, Elena said. Behind the heavy tool rack he never uses because he is too busy working. There is a loose panel in the drywall. I bought a fireproof safe and had it installed when he was in Tokyo last spring. It is all there, Carter. Untraceable tax-free cash. That is our running away fund. The courtroom erupted. This time, Judge Sterling did not bang his gavel immediately. He seemed too stunned. My God, David whispered next to me. Hidden assets. Perjury. She swore under oath this morning that she had zero savings and less than $500 in her checking account. This was the smoking gun. In a divorce proceeding, hiding assets is a cardinal sin. But admitting to stealing from your spouse and hiding $250,000 in a wall while pleading poverty to the court, that was criminal fraud. On the screen, the conversation shifted. Elena picked up the wine glass again. I just have to keep up the act for a few more months, she said, sighing heavily. It is exhausting, Carter. Pretending to be the victim. I have to cry on command. I have to make myself look messy when I go to court. My lawyer says if I play the battered wife card, the judge will eat out of my hand. Sterling is a hard ass, Carter warned. Sterling is a man, Elena countered, flashing a predatory grin. And men are easy to manipulate. I will just wear a big sweater, cry about how lonely I am, and say John scares me. It works every time. By the time I am done, John will be lucky if he is allowed to see Leo on Christmas. At the mention of Leo, the video Elena paused. She looked at the tablet, at the very device recording her, and frowned. Why is this thing on? She muttered. She reached out her hand, expanding to fill the frame, and then the screen went black. The video ended. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and terrifying. It was the silence of a room where the oxygen had been instantaneously sucked out. Slowly, almost mechanically, every head in the courtroom turned. They turned away from the black screen and looked at Elena. She was frozen. Her hands were gripping the table so hard that her fingernails were digging into the wood. Her face was a mask of horror. The big sweater she was wearing, the one she had just admitted was a costume designed to manipulate the judge, suddenly looked like a prison uniform. Mr. Vance, her shark of a lawyer, looked like he had been shot. He was staring at his client with a mixture of disbelief and professional terror. He knew in that instant that his career was on the line. He had just suborned perjury. He had presented a case built entirely on the lies of a woman who had just confessed on video to playing him and the court for fools. $200,000, Judge Sterling said. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a falling anvil. He was not looking at the lawyers. He was looking directly at Elena. Mrs. Rodriguez, the judge continued, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. Did you or did you not sign a sworn financial affidavit this morning, stating that you had no hidden assets? Elena opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at Vance for help, but Vance physically recoiled from her, shifting his chair a few inches away. He was cutting her loose. Elena croaked. Her voice was thin and reedy. That was a joke. I was drunk. I was just bragging to impress. You were bragging about a safe behind a tool rack? Judge Sterling interrupted, his eyes narrowing. A safe containing $200,000 of marital funds? It does not exist, Elena shrieked, suddenly standing up. Her composure snapped violently. There is no safe. It was just talk. That video is fake. John made it. He used his computer magic to make it. Sit down, Judge Sterling bellowed. He is framing me, Elena screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. He is the one who is lying. Carter, tell them. Tell them it is a lie. She turned to the witness stand. Carter Bennett was sitting there, pale and sweating. He looked like a trapped animal. He knew that if he spoke, he would be digging his own grave deeper. The video had captured his voice, his conspiracy, his admission of intent to defraud. "Mr. Bennett," Judge Sterling said, turning his gaze to the witness box, "I remind you that you are still under oath, and I remind you that perjury is a felony offense in the state of Washington. Do you wish to amend your previous testimony regarding your relationship with Mrs. Rodriguez and your knowledge of the defendant's finances?" Carter swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed. He looked at Elena, then at the judge, and finally at me. In his eyes, I saw the exact moment his self-preservation instinct kicked in. Carter stammered, "I invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination." The courtroom exploded. The gallery erupted into whispers and gasps. Taking the Fifth in a civil trial was essentially an admission of guilt in the eyes of everyone present, even if not technically in the eyes of the law. But here, after that video, it was the final nail in the coffin. Elena gasped a sound like a wounded animal. She looked at Carter with betrayal written all over her face. "You coward!" she screamed at him. "You promised we would take him down!" "That is enough," Judge Sterling slammed his gavel down once, twice, 3 times. "Bailiff, secure the courtroom. Nobody leaves." I sat there, my heart pounding in my ears like a war drum. I looked at the black screen where the video had played, and then I looked at my son. Leo was standing by the clerk's desk, his hand still resting on the iPad. He looked exhausted. He looked small, but he also looked triumphant. He had just detonated a nuclear bomb in the middle of my life, but instead of destroying me, it had blown away the walls of the prison I had been living in. But he wasn't done. He looked at the judge, and then he tapped the screen again. "There is more," Leo said softly. The room went quiet again. The horror wasn't over. The first video had exposed the greed and the infidelity. But the next one, I knew with a sickening dread, would expose something far worse. It would expose the heart of the mother my son had been forced to live with. The silence in the courtroom following the first video was heavy, filled with the debris of shattered reputations. But the second video Leo queued up did not just break the silence. It broke my heart. The screen flickered to life again. The timestamp read, November 12th, 7:30 in the evening. I felt a physical jolt in my stomach. November 12th. That was the night of the massive server migration at Etheria. I had been at the office until 4 in the morning putting out fires, while my phone sat dead in my drawer because I had forgotten my charger. I had come home the next morning to find the house quiet, and Leo asleep, and I had left again before he woke up. I had hated myself for it then, but watching the scene unfold on the projection screen, I realized my absence was the least of the sins committed that night. The video feed was from the camera in the master bedroom. It was positioned on the dresser, likely left there by Leo after he had been fixing Elena's devices. The angle captured the vanity table where Elena sat. She was transformed. Gone were the sweatpants and the messy bun she usually wore when I came home late. In the video, she was wearing a backless black cocktail dress that shimmered under the vanity lights. She was applying lipstick with the precision of an artist, staring at her reflection with a look of intense self-satisfaction. Then a sound cut through the room. It was a wet, heavy cough. Leo walked into the frame. He looked terrible. Even on the video, his skin looked pale and clammy, his eyes glassy and feverish. He was wearing his dinosaur pajamas, hugging a stuffed bear I had bought him when he was 4. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, a tiny figure drowning in the vastness of the luxury bedroom I had worked so hard to pay for. "Mom," Leo croaked. His voice was thick with congestion. Elena did not turn around. She did not stop applying her lipstick. She merely sighed a sharp exhalation of annoyance that was loud enough to be picked up by the microphone. "What is it, Leo?" she asked, her voice tight. "I am in a rush. Uncle Carter is waiting downstairs." "I don't feel good," Leo whispered. He took a step closer to her, reaching out a small hand as if to touch her arm for comfort. "My head hurts, and I am really hot. Can you stay home, please?" I watched my hands gripping the edge of the defendant's table, so hard my knuckles turned white. Any parent, any human being with a soul, would have dropped the lipstick. They would have turned around. They would have felt their child's forehead. They would have canceled their plans. Elena did none of those things. She recoiled. She actually pulled her arm away from his reaching hand, as if he were contagious. She spun around on her stool, her face twisted in a scowl of irritation. "Leo, stop it," she snapped. "Do not touch me. Your hands are sticky and this is silk. Do you have any idea how much this dress cost? If you get snot on it, it is ruined." "But, Mom," Leo whimpered, a tear sliding down his flushed cheek. "I think I have a fever." "You are fine," she dismissed him, turning back to the mirror to check her eyeliner. "You are just acting out because you want attention. Go to the kitchen, get some water, and go back to bed." "I can't reach the cups," Leo said, his voice breaking. "Then use the bathroom sink," she shouted. She stood up, smoothing down the dress, checking her silhouette. She looked stunning, and she looked monstrous. "I have to go. This meeting with Uncle Carter is important. We are discussing finances. Do you want to live in a box on the street? No? Then let me go do what I have to do to save this family." She grabbed her clutch from the bed. She sprayed perfume on her neck. A scent I recognized, a scent she told me she only wore for special occasions. Leo stood in the doorway, blocking her path. He looked up at her, his eyes wide and desperate. "When is Dad coming home?" he asked. It was the question of a child looking for a lifeline. "If Mom won't help me, maybe Dad will." Elena stopped. She looked down at him, and then she crouched down. For a second I thought she was going to hug him. I hoped, despite everything, that a flicker of maternal instinct would kick in. But she didn't hug him. She brought her face close to his, her eyes cold and hard. "Daddy isn't coming home, Leo," she said softly. The lie hung in the courtroom air, toxic and heavy. "He is at work," Leo said, trembling. "He is at work because he prefers his building blocks to you," Elena said. Her voice was smooth, like velvet wrapped around a razor blade. "Daddy doesn't care that you are sick. He doesn't care that I am lonely. He only loves himself. He left us, Leo. He left us a long time ago." I felt a sob rip through my chest. It was an involuntary sound, a guttural noise of pain that I couldn't suppress. I covered my mouth with my hand, tears blurring my vision. She was erasing me. She wasn't just neglecting him. She was systematically destroying his image of me to justify her own abandonment. "Only Uncle Carter cares about us," Elena continued, smoothing Leo's hair down. Not with affection, but to make him look less messy. "Uncle Carter is the one who takes care of things. Remember that." She stood up. "Now go to bed, and do not call me. I will be in a meeting." She walked past him. She didn't look back. She walked out of the bedroom, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor, fading away into the distance. The video did not end there. If the interaction with Elena was infuriating, what happened next was shattering. The camera lingered on Leo. He stood alone in the middle of the room for a long time. The silence of the house was deafening. He looked at the empty doorway where his mother had vanished. He coughed again, a deep, racking sound that shook his small body. Then he moved. He didn't go back to bed. He walked into the master bathroom. The camera angle shifted slightly as he moved, but we could see him clearly in the reflection of the large mirror. He grabbed the step stool Elena used for her high shelves. He dragged it over to the medicine cabinet. He climbed up, his legs shaking. He opened the cabinet and found the digital thermometer. He put it in his ear, waiting for the beep. We couldn't see the number, but we saw Leo's reaction. He pulled it out, looked at it, and his eyes widened. He wiped it on his pajamas and put it back. Then he went to the sink. He cupped his hands under the faucet and drank tap water, water dripping down his chin and onto his pajamas. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. He walked back into the bedroom. He went to the nightstand on my side of the bed. He picked up the landline, the old phone we kept for emergencies. He dialed a number. My number. On the screen, I watched my son press the phone to his ear. He waited, and waited, and waited. I knew why he was waiting. My phone was dead in a desk drawer 5 miles away. "Hi," Leo said to the empty air. He was leaving a voicemail. "Daddy," he whispered. "It is Leo. I know you are busy working. I am sorry to bother you." The politeness broke me. He was apologizing for existing. "I just wanted to say good night," he continued, his voice wavering. "I have a fever. It is 102. But I drank some water. Mom had to go out with Uncle Carter. It is okay. I am a big boy." He paused. He hugged the bear tighter. "Mom says you don't want to come home," he said, tears finally spilling over his cheeks. "But if you do come home, can you wake me up? Even if I am asleep? I promise I won't be grumpy. I just want to see you. I love you, Daddy. Bye." He hung up the phone. He placed it gently back on the receiver. Then he climbed into my side of the bed, pulled my pillow over his head and curled into a ball. The screen went black. For a moment there was no sound in the courtroom except for the sound of my own weeping. I couldn't stop it. I buried my face in my hands, my shoulders shaking. I had been so blind. I had thought working hard was the same as loving them. I had thought providing a house was the same as making a home. And while I was building skyscrapers, my son was alone in the dark, thinking I had abandoned him. "Oh my God," someone in the gallery whispered. I looked up through my tears. Judge Sterling was not writing notes. He was not looking at the law books. He was looking at Elena. If looks could execute, Elena would have been dead on the spot. Judge Sterling's expression was one of pure, unadulterated revulsion. It was the look a human being gives to something that crawls out from under a rock. He looked at her dress, the modest cardigan she wore today, and then back at the memory of the black cocktail dress on the screen. He saw the deception. He saw the coldness. Elena was shrinking. She was physically recoiling from the screen, her hands covering her mouth. She looked terrified, but not because of the guilt. She was terrified because she had been seen. Her mask of the suffering, devoted mother had been ripped off, revealing the narcissist underneath. Arthur Vance the shark looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. He stood up slowly, but his usual confidence was gone. He looked pale. "Your Honor," Vance said, but his voice lacked conviction. It was weak. "We object. This footage is highly suspect. In the age of AI, deepfakes are incredibly sophisticated. We have no way of knowing if someone edited this to make my client look unfavorable." "Unfavorable," Judge Sterling repeated the word. His voice was quiet, but it vibrated with a suppressed fury that was more terrifying than a shout. "Mr. Vance, you are telling me that an 8-year-old boy used artificial intelligence to generate a video of his mother neglecting him while she went out with your other witness? Is that your argument?" "I am saying it is possible," Vance stammered, sweating. "The defendant is a tech expert. He could have—" "Stop," Judge Sterling cut him off. "Just stop. You are insulting my intelligence and you are insulting the dignity of this court. I have seen deepfakes, Mr. Vance. I know what they look like. I know how the shadows don't quite match, how the blinking is irregular. That video was raw footage. And frankly, looking at your client's reaction, I don't think she is denying the event occurred. She is just horrified that we saw it." He turned his gaze to Elena. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Judge Sterling said. "Is that you in the video?" Elena trembled. She looked at Vance, but Vance was staring at his shoes. He knew it was over. Elena whispered. "I was stressed. I needed to go out. Leo is always dramatic when he is sick. He exaggerates." "He had a fever of 102, the judge said, his voice like ice. "And he was alone. You left an 8-year-old child alone in a house at night to go drinking with your paramour." "I checked on him," she lied, desperate now. "I came back early." "The timestamp on the next file says otherwise." Leo spoke up from the clerk's desk. Everyone turned to look at Leo. He was crying, silent tears streaming down his face, but he stood his ground. "You didn't come back until 3 in the morning," Leo said. "I heard you. You were laughing with him in the hallway." Judge Sterling looked at Leo, his expression softening into profound sorrow. "Emotional neglect," the judge said almost to himself. "I have sat on this bench for 20 years. I have seen physical abuse, I have seen drug addiction. But this cold, calculated cruelty? This is a special kind of evil." He looked at me. "Mr. Rodriguez, take a moment. Compose yourself." I nodded, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. I didn't care about the money anymore. I didn't care about the house. I just wanted to grab Leo and run. I wanted to take him far away from the woman who had looked at him with such disdain. "There is one more video," Leo said. His voice was tired now. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the exhaustion of a child who has carried a burden too heavy for his shoulders. "This is the one where they talk about the plan, the police plan." The room went rigid. We had seen the fraud. We had seen the neglect. But the mention of police suggested something else entirely. Elena let out a low moan. "No," she whispered. "No, please." "Play it," Judge Sterling ordered. His voice was final. There was no mercy left in him. Leo tapped the screen one last time, and the final horror began. The air in the courtroom had changed. It was no longer heavy with the sorrow of a broken family or the tragedy of a neglected child. It had sharpened into something jagged and dangerous. We were no longer watching a domestic dispute. We were standing on the precipice of a crime scene. Leo tapped the screen of his iPad for the third time. The projection on the wall flickered, the pixels rearranging themselves to form a new nightmare. The timestamp in the corner read, January 14th, 2 days before the trial began. The time was 9:15 in the evening. The setting was the dining room. It was the room where I had hosted Thanksgiving dinners, where I had blown out candles on birthday cakes, where I had sat with Leo to help him with his math homework. Now it looked like a war room. Elena and Carter were sitting across from each other at the long mahogany table. The remains of a takeout dinner were pushed to the side. Thai food from the place I used to love, but Elena always claimed gave her allergies. Apparently her allergies were as fabricated as her affection. The atmosphere in the video was intense. There was no laughter this time, no casual drinking. They were leaning in their heads close together, conspiring with the focus of generals planning an invasion. "We have a problem," Carter said on the recording. His voice was low, agitated. He was tapping a pen against the table, a nervous staccato rhythm that echoed through the courtroom speakers. "Vance says John is not rolling over. His lawyer is pushing back on the custody arrangement. If he fights for 50-50, he will get it. Washington is a no-fault state. Unless he is unfit, he stays in Leo's life." Elena slammed her hand down on the table. The sound made everyone in the courtroom jump. "He cannot stay in Leo's life," she hissed. Her face was twisted into a scowl that made her look 10 years older. "If he has custody, he controls the child support payments. If he has Leo half the time, I don't get the full spousal support package. I did the math, Carter. We lose nearly $4,000 a month if he gets partial custody." "I know," Carter said, rubbing his temples. "That is why we need to escalate. We need him to be more than just a bad husband. We need him to be a liability to the court." I watched, paralyzed. They were discussing my son not as a human being, but as a variable in an equation of greed. "What about the domestic violence angle?" Carter suggested. He looked at her, his eyes cold and calculating. "We could stage an incident, tonight. You call 911, scream a little, say he hit you." "He is not here," Elena pointed out, rolling her eyes. "He is staying at the hotel downtown. It would look suspicious if I claimed he broke in just to slap me." "Then we fake the aftermath," Carter said. "You bruise easily. We can make it look like he grabbed you last week and you were too scared to report it until now. Vance can spin that. Battered woman syndrome. In the courtroom, I heard a gasp from the jury box. Although there was no jury, the clerk and the bailiff were the audience, and they were horrified. Elena was sitting at the plaintiff's table, her face buried in her hands. She was shaking. This was not the shaking of a victim. It was the trembling of a criminal, realizing the noose was tightening. On the screen, Elena shook her head. "No," she said. "A bruise is not enough. Judges are cynical these days. John has no history of violence. He is too passive. If we go with abuse, it becomes he," she said. "I want something concrete. I want something that puts him away." She stood up and walked to the sideboard. She picked up a thick leather portfolio. I recognized it. It was my old portfolio from Etheria, one I thought I had lost months ago. She threw it onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud. "I have a better idea," Elena said, a dark smile playing on her lips. "Why settle for a restraining order when we can get a felony conviction?" Carter opened the portfolio. He flipped through the pages. "What is this?" "This," Elena said, leaning over his shoulder, "is the end of John Rodriguez." She reached into the pocket of the portfolio and pulled out a stack of documents. They were blueprints and technical specifications. I squinted at the screen. I recognized the headers. It was the proprietary code for the Etheria virtual interface, the project I had been leading for 2 years. It was trade secret material. "I took these from his home office before he moved out," Elena explained. "And look at the last page." Carter turned the page. "A transfer authorization," he read. "Selling the source code to Omnicorp?" Omnicorp was our biggest rival. Selling that code to them would be industrial espionage. It would be a federal crime. "But John didn't sign this," Carter said. "He did now," Elena said. She pulled a sheet of tracing paper from under the document. "I spent 3 hours last night practicing. Look." She pointed to the bottom of the page. There in blue ink was my signature. It was perfect. It was the signature I had used on thousands of documents. It was the signature I had used on our marriage license. "My God," Carter whispered. A slow grin spread across his face. "This is forgery." "It is only forgery if they catch you," Elena said, dismissing the word with a wave of her hand. "But here is the beauty of it. We don't submit this to the court ourselves. We plant it." "Plant it where?" "In his office at Etheria," Elena said. "I still have his spare security badge. You go in tonight. You slip this folder into his filing cabinet, the one he keeps locked. Then, you make an anonymous tip to the Etheria Board of Directors tomorrow morning. You tell them you heard rumors that John was selling secrets to pay for his divorce." Carter laughed. It was a sound of pure admiration. "That is brilliant. The internal audit will find the file. They will see the transfer request with his signature. They will fire him immediately. And then, they will call the FBI." "Exactly," Elena said, pacing the room, now fueled by the adrenaline of her own malice. "When he is arrested for corporate theft, the divorce court will strip him of everything. No judge will give custody of a child to a felon awaiting trial. I will get 100% custody. I will get the house. I will get the frozen assets because the court will release them to the innocent spouse for child maintenance." She stopped pacing and looked at Carter, her eyes shining with greed. "And do you know what the best part is?" she asked. "What?" "With John in prison and the settlement finalized, we will have enough liquid cash to take that trip we talked about," she said. "Europe. Not just for a week. For a whole year. We can rent a villa in Tuscany. We can put Leo in a boarding school in Switzerland so he is out of our hair. It will be just you and me drinking wine and spending John's money." In the courtroom, the silence was deafening. This was no longer a civil matter. We had just watched 2 people conspire to commit multiple felonies: forgery, industrial espionage, filing a false police report, and fraud. Carter on the screen stood up. He walked over to Elena and wrapped his arms around her waist. He pulled her close. "You are terrifying," he said, his voice husky. Remind me never to cross you. Just make sure you stick to the plan, Elena whispered, running her hands through his hair. John is weak. He won't fight back. He will crumble the moment the police show up. He is pathetic. Carter leaned down and kissed her. It was a long, passionate kiss, shared over the documents that were designed to destroy my life. You truly are my evil genius, Carter murmured against her lips. The screen went black. For a long, agonizing moment, nobody moved. The weight of what we had just seen pressed down on the room like a physical force. I sat frozen in my chair. My mind was racing, replaying the last year of my life. The missing files, the rumors at work, the strange looks from security. They hadn't just been gaslighting me at home, they had been setting the stage for my incarceration. If Leo had not played that video, Carter would have planted that file. I would have been arrested. I would be sitting in a cell right now instead of this courtroom. Judge Sterling slowly took off his glasses. He placed them on the bench with a deliberate, trembling hand. He did not look like a judge anymore. He looked like a man who had stared into the abyss and found it staring back. He turned his head slowly to look at the witness stand. Carter Bennett was no longer sweating. He was gray. He was gripping the railing of the witness box as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. He knew. He knew that the Fifth Amendment could not save him from this. This wasn't a question of past actions. This was video evidence of a conspiracy to commit federal crimes. Judge Sterling then turned his gaze to Elena. She was staring at the blank screen, her mouth open in a silent scream. Her entire world, the narrative of the victim, the plan for the money, the dream of Europe, had just been incinerated by the son she wanted to ship off to a boarding school. Bailiff, Judge Sterling said. His voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the authority of thunder. Yes, Your Honor, the bailiff responded, his hand already resting on his holster. Lock the doors, Judge Sterling ordered. Nobody leaves this room. And call the Seattle Police Department. Tell them to send a squad car. Tell them we have a situation involving criminal conspiracy, evidence tampering, and grand larceny. Yes, Your Honor, the bailiff said, pulling out his radio. Arthur Vance, Elena's lawyer, stood up. He looked like he was about to faint. He began shoving papers into his briefcase with frantic, jerky movements. Your Honor, Vance stammered, his voice cracking. I must request a recess. I was not aware. My client did not inform me. Sit down, Mr. Vance, Judge Sterling barked. You are an officer of the court. You will stay right where you are until the police arrive. If you try to leave, I will have you arrested for obstruction of justice. Vance collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. He knew his reputation was ruined. I looked at Leo. He was still standing by the clerk's desk. He looked tired. He looked so incredibly young. He had just taken down 2 adults who had spent a year plotting my destruction. Leo, I said, my voice breaking. He looked at me. His lower lip trembled. Did I do good, Dad? He asked softly. I stood up, ignoring protocol, ignoring the judge, ignoring everything. I walked over to the clerk's desk and fell to my knees. I wrapped my arms around my son, burying my face in his small shoulder. I held him tighter than I had ever held anything in my life. You did good, Leo, I sobbed into his jacket. You did so good. You saved me. You saved us. But the machinery of justice was already grinding into gear. I heard the sirens approaching in the distance, their wail growing louder, with every passing second cutting through the rain outside. The game was over. The villains had been unmasked, and now they were going to pay. Mrs. Rodriguez, Judge Sterling said, his voice cold and final. Mr. Bennett, you are both remanded into custody, pending the arrival of law enforcement. Do not move. Elena finally turned to look at me. Her eyes were wild, filled with panic and hate. It was a joke, she screamed, her voice shrill and hysterical. John, tell them. It was just a joke. We were role-playing. We didn't mean it. I stood up, holding Leo's hand. I looked at the woman I had married, the woman I had loved, the woman who had planned to send me to prison, so she could vacation in Italy. "The time for jokes is over, Elena," I said, my voice steady for the first time in months. "Save it for the police." The double doors of the courtroom burst open. Two uniformed officers stepped in, rain dripping from their coats. They looked at the judge, then at the bailiff, and finally at the frozen figures of my wife and my best friend. "Take them," Judge Sterling said, pointing a finger at the conspirators. "Take them both." The silence that had gripped the courtroom shattered the moment the police officers crossed the threshold. It was as if the vacuum created by Leo's truth bomb had suddenly been filled with a rush of chaotic kinetic energy. The atmosphere shifted instantly from a stunning revelation to a crime scene in active development. My lawyer, David, who had spent the last 3 hours looking like a man trying to stop a flood with a paper cup, suddenly transformed. The defeat in his posture evaporated. He slammed his hand down on the defense table, the sound cracking like a whip, and stood up with the righteous fury of a man who has just been handed a nuclear weapon. "Your Honor!" David shouted, his voice booming over the commotion. "The defense moves for an immediate dismissal of all civil complaints. We are looking at irrefutable digital evidence of a conspiracy to commit grand larceny, perjury, industrial espionage, and filing a false police report. This is not a divorce hearing anymore, Your Honor. This is a confession to a federal crime." Judge Sterling did not need convincing. He was already standing, his face a mask of thunderous anger. "Sustain!" he roared back. "Mr. Vance, your client has effectively just testified against herself." At the mention of his name, Arthur Vance, the shark who had tried to disembowel me for hours, looked like he had swallowed poison. He stared at the blank projection screen, then at Elena, with a look of pure horror. He realized he had been dragged into the blast radius of a felony. But my eyes were not on the lawyers. They were on the rats, trying to flee the sinking ship. Carter Bennett, the man I had called my best friend for 15 years, the man who had stood by my side at my wedding, made his move. He saw the two uniformed officers stepping toward the bench, their hands resting on their belts. Carter, sweating profusely his charcoal suit, now looking like a shroud, tried to use the confusion to his advantage. He took a step backward, away from the witness stand, his eyes darting toward the side exit used by court staff. He moved with the desperate, jerky motions of a trapped animal. He thought that if he could just get out the door, if he could just make it to his car, maybe he could disappear. Maybe he could liquidate his accounts and fly to a non-extradition country before the system caught up with him. "Officer!" Judge Sterling barked, his finger pointing accusingly at Carter. "Do not let that man leave this room." Carter lunged for the door handle, but he was too slow and too soft. One of the bailiffs, a man built like a linebacker, who had been watching the proceedings with growing disgust, stepped into his path. It was like watching a bicycle crash into a brick wall. Carter slammed into the bailiff's chest and bounced back, stumbling over his own expensive Italian shoes. "Going somewhere, Mr. Bennett?" the bailiff asked, his voice dripping with satisfaction. He grabbed Carter by the upper arm, his grip visibly tight enough to bruise. Carter let out a pathetic squeak, his arrogance completely evaporated. He slumped against the wall, defeated, watching his life dissolve in real time. But while Carter was trying to flee, Elena was doing something far more dangerous. She was not looking at the police. She was not looking at the judge. She was not even looking at me. Her eyes, wide, bloodshot, and burning with a terrifying madness, were fixed on one person and one person only. Leo. The realization that her 8-year-old son, the prop she had used to garner sympathy, the burden she planned to ship off to boarding school, had single-handedly orchestrated her destruction, was too much for her narcissism to process. Her brain snapped. The facade of the weeping, victimized wife didn't just crack, it exploded. "You!" she screamed. It was a sound I will never forget as long as I live. It was primal, guttural, stripped of all humanity. It was the shriek of a demon exposed to the light. She pushed her chair back so hard it tipped over and clattered loudly onto the wooden floor. She ignored Vance, who reached out a hand to stop her. She ignored the judge shouting for order. "You little ungrateful brat!" she shrieked, launching herself from behind the plaintiff's table. She ran toward the clerk's desk, where Leo was standing. Her face was twisted into a rictus of hate, her teeth bared. She looked unrecognizable. The beautiful, poised woman I had married was gone, replaced by a creature of pure venom. "I gave you life," she screamed, her voice tearing at her throat. "I fed you. I clothed you. And this is how you repay me? You side with him. You ruin me." The courtroom erupted into total chaos. "Restrain her!" Judge Sterling hammered his gavel down the wood, striking wood with a violence that echoed like gunshots. "Order! Order in this court!" But Elena was fast fueled by the adrenaline of ruin. She was closing the distance to Leo, her hands curled into claws, ready to strike the child who had dared to speak the truth. Leo didn't run. He froze. He stood there by the clerk's desk, clutching his iPad, his eyes wide with terror, as his mother charged at him like a wild beast. He flinched, curling his shoulders and waiting for the blow he knew was coming. But the blow never landed. I did not think. I did not calculate. The moment I saw her chair tip over, my body moved on its own. It was an instinct older than language, woven into the DNA of every father who has ever drawn breath. I vaulted over the defense table. Papers flew into the air. My knee clipped the edge of the wood, sending a jolt of pain up my leg, but I didn't feel it. I sprinted across the gap, a blur of motion in the stagnant air of the courtroom. Just as Elena reached the clerk's desk, just as she raised her hand to strike our son, I slammed into the space between them. I turned my back to her, wrapping my arms around Leo, engulfing his small frame with my own. I crouched down, turning myself into a human shield, burying his head against my chest. "Don't you touch him!" I roared, the sound vibrating through my entire body. I felt her impact against my back. She didn't stop. She clawed at my suit jacket, pounding her fists against my shoulders, screaming incoherent obscenities. "Get out of my way!" she howled, sounding completely unhinged. "He is mine! I own him! He is my son!" "He is not yours," I shouted back, not moving an inch, holding Leo so tight I was afraid I might crush him. "You lost him! You lost him the moment you left him alone to die of a fever." The police officers were on her a second later. It took two of them to pull her off me. She was thrashing, kicking, spitting like a feral cat. "Get your hands off me!" she screamed at the officers, her voice cracking. "Do you know who I am? I am the victim here. That man is a thief. That boy is a liar. They doctored the videos. It is all fake." They dragged her back toward the center of the room. Her hair, usually so perfectly styled, was falling across her face in wild strands. Her cardigan had been torn in the struggle. She looked deranged. Judge Sterling stood up, his face purple with rage. He pointed his gavel at her like a weapon. "Madam, you are in direct contempt of this court. You are assaulting a minor inside a hall of justice. One more word and I will have you gagged." Elena spun around to face the judge. All survival instincts were gone. She burned the bridges, the boats, and the water beneath them. "You stupid old man," she spat at Judge Sterling. "You are just like him, weak, gullible. You think you are so smart in your robe? You are nothing. I played you. I played all of you." Then she turned on Vance. Her lawyer was standing there, clutching his briefcase, looking at her with a mixture of fear and revulsion. "And you," she screamed at Vance. "You useless, incompetent hack. I paid you a retainer of $10,000 to ruin him, and you let an 8-year-old beat you. You are fired. Do you hear me? You are fired." Vance didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He looked at the judge, his face pale. "Your Honor," Vance said, his voice shaking. He began shoving his files into his bag with frantic haste. "I am formally requesting permission to withdraw as counsel for the plaintiff effective immediately." "On what grounds, Mr. Vance?" Judge Sterling asked, though the answer was obvious. "Ethical conflict, Your Honor," Vance said, his voice rising in panic. "My client has clearly perjured herself. She has involved me unknowingly in a criminal conspiracy. She has falsified evidence and lied to me about the fundamental facts of this case. I cannot represent her. I will not represent her." "Motion granted," Judge Sterling snapped. "Get out of my sight, Mr. Vance, but do not leave the building. The district attorney will want a word with you about what you knew and when you knew it." Vance nodded frantically and practically ran for the exit, passing the bailiff, who was still pinning Carter against the wall. The police finally managed to handcuff Elena. The click of the metal cuffs echoed through the room, a sharp metallic period at the end of her sentence. She struggled for a moment longer, then realizing the physical fight was lost, she slumped. The adrenaline crash hit her. She began to sob. Not the fake, pretty tears she had used earlier, but ugly, heaving sobs of a narcissist who realizes she has lost control. "Carter!" she wailed, looking across the room at her lover. "Do something! Help me!" Carter, his face pressed against the plaster by the bailiff, didn't even look at her. He closed his eyes, pretending she didn't exist, already retreating into his own shell of self-preservation. The courtroom began to settle into a stunned, vibrating quiet. The storm had passed, leaving only the wreckage. I slowly unclenched my muscles. I was still crouching by the clerk's desk, my arms wrapped around Leo. I pulled back slightly to look at him. He was shaking. His face was buried in my shirt, his small hands gripping my lapels so tightly that his knuckles were white. He was breathing in hitching gasps. "Leo," I whispered, brushing the hair out of his eyes. "Leo, look at me. It is over. She can't hurt you. I promise." He slowly lifted his head. His eyes were red, puffy, and wide with the aftershocks of fear. He looked over my shoulder at his mother, who was now being read her Miranda rights by a stern-faced officer. He watched as they pulled her toward the door, her heels dragging on the floor, her voice reduced to a low, moaning whimper. He watched her go. He watched the woman who had given birth to him, the woman who had ignored him, the woman who had tried to attack him, be removed from his life. Then he looked back at me. I saw a change in his eyes. The hardness, the determination that had carried him through the presentation of the evidence was melting away. He was becoming a child again. He was becoming my little boy. He loosened his grip on my jacket and reached down to take my hand. His fingers were cold. He squeezed my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Daddy," he said. His voice was small, barely a whisper in the cavernous room. "I am here, Leo," I said, squeezing back. "I am right here." He took a deep, shuddering breath. He looked at the iPad sitting on the desk, the weapon he had used to slay the dragons, and then he looked up at me with a profound, exhausted relief. "I protected you," Leo said softly. Tears welled up in my eyes, again hot and stinging. "Yes, you did, son. You saved my life." He stepped closer, pressing his forehead against my chest. "Now you protect me," he whispered. "Okay?" The words pierced my heart, but in the best way possible. It was a transfer of command. He had held the line when I was too blind to see the war. He had fought the battle I didn't know we were fighting. And now, he was handing the sword back to me. He was asking to be a child again. I scooped him up into my arms, standing up despite the pain in my knee. I held him high on my shoulder, just like I used to when he was a toddler. He buried his face in my neck, wrapping his arms and legs around me, anchoring himself to the only solid thing left in his world. "I promise," I choked out, my voice thick with emotion. "I promise, Leo. I will never let anyone hurt you again. I will protect you with everything I have. Always." I turned to face the judge, holding my son ready for whatever judgment came next. But I knew in my bones that the war was over. We had won. The silence that descended upon the courtroom after the police officers took their positions was unlike any silence I had ever experienced. It was not the quiet of peace, nor was it the tense stillness of anticipation. It was the heavy, crushing silence of judgment. The storm of chaos that had erupted moments ago, Elena's screaming, my leap over the table, the scuffle, had been sucked out of the room, replaced by the terrifying authority of the law. I stood there, my chest heaving, Leo's small arms still wrapped tightly around my neck. I could feel his heart beating against my collarbone, a rapid fluttering rhythm that was slowly beginning to sync with my own. I did not move to return to the defense table. I stayed right there in the center of the room, holding my son, standing like a survivor on a battlefield who has just watched the smoke clear. Judge Sterling remained standing. He loomed over his bench, a figure of Old Testament wrath in black robes. He did not look at his notes. He did not consult with the clerk. He had seen enough. The videos Leo had played were not just evidence. They were a window into a soul so rotten that it had contaminated his courtroom. "Officers," Judge Sterling said. His voice was no longer a shout. It was a low, resonant baritone that carried to every corner of the room, vibrating with finality. "Secure the defendants. I am ordering the immediate arrest of Elena Rodriguez and Carter Bennett." The click of the handcuffs ratcheting shut on Elena's wrists was a sound that seemed to echo for an eternity. It was a sharp, mechanical punctuation mark, ending 12 years of my life. "On what charges, Your Honor?" one of the officers asked, gripping Elena's arm as she sagged against him, her face a mask of shock. "Conspiracy to commit grand larceny," Judge Sterling recited, ticking the crimes off on his fingers with lethal precision. "Industrial espionage, perjury, filing a false police report, and based on the footage we just viewed, reckless endangerment of a minor. You will transport them immediately to the King County Jail. I will be forwarding the digital evidence presented here today to the District Attorney's Office with a strong recommendation that they prosecute to the fullest extent of the law. These two individuals are a danger to society, and more specifically, a danger to this family." Carter Bennett, the man who had sat at my dinner table, who had toasted to my success, let out a low, pathetic moan. He did not fight. He looked deflated, a suit filled with sawdust. He knew the game was over. The bailiff, with a look of utter disdain, yanked Carter away from the wall, spinning him around to cuff his hands behind his back. Carter's eyes were squeezed shut, as if by closing them, he could make the nightmare disappear. Elena, however, was not done. The narcissist in her could not accept a reality where she was not the protagonist, even if she was the villain. "No," she whimpered, her voice trembling. "No, you cannot do this. I am a mother. I have rights." Judge Sterling looked down at her. If he had possessed a gavel made of lightning, I believe he would have struck her with it. "You have the right to remain silent," the judge said coldly. "And I suggest you use it, though. I doubt you possess the capacity for that kind of wisdom." He turned his attention to the court clerk, his demeanor shifting from prosecutor to adjudicator. "In the matter of the civil divorce case, Rodriguez versus Rodriguez, I am issuing a summary judgment from the bench. I have seen enough. There is no need for closing arguments. There is no need for deliberation. The facts are indisputable." He looked at me. For the first time all day, his eyes were not hard. They were filled with a grave, profound respect. "Mr. Rodriguez," he said. "Yes, Your Honor," I replied, shifting Leo's weight slightly on my hip. "The court finds that you are the victim of a malicious and coordinated effort to destroy your reputation, your finances, and your relationship with your son," Sterling said. "Therefore, I am dismissing every single petition filed by the plaintiff. Her request for alimony is denied with prejudice. Her request for asset division is denied." He paused, looking at Elena, who was now weeping openly, her mascara running in dark streaks down her face. "Regarding the custody of the minor child, Leo Rodriguez," the judge continued, his voice hardening, "it is the ruling of this court that full sole legal and physical custody be awarded to the father, John Rodriguez, effective immediately." I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for a year. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you." "Furthermore," the judge added, pointing a finger at Elena, "I am issuing a permanent restraining order against the mother. Mrs. Rodriguez, you are stripped of all visitation rights. You are not to come within 500 feet of your son or your ex-husband. You are not to contact them by phone, email, or third party. This order will remain in effect until the conclusion of your criminal trial, at which point, depending on your incarceration status, you may petition the court for a psychological evaluation to determine if you are fit for supervised visits. But frankly, based on what I saw today, I would not hold my breath. Elena let out a shriek. You are stealing my son. He is my baby. You abdicated your title as a mother the night you left a sick child alone to plot a felony with your lover, Sterling shot back. You did not lose him today, madam. You lost him a long time ago. The judge turned back to the papers on his desk, signing the order with a flourish of his pen. All marital assets, including the primary residence in the Highlands, the vacation property, and 100% of Mr. Rodriguez's stock holdings in Etheria Systems, are awarded to the defendant. Additionally, Mrs. Rodriguez, you are ordered to pay all legal fees incurred by your husband during this process. Since you claim to have a hidden cache of $200,000 in your garage, I suggest the police start there to satisfy that debt. He slammed the gavel down one last time. Court is adjourned. Get them out of my sight. The officers began to move. They grabbed Elena by the elbows, forcing her to walk. The reality of the situation finally pierced through her delusion. She realized that the victim act hadn't worked, that the threats hadn't worked, and that she was about to be walked out of her life and into a cage. She dug her heels into the floor, twisting her body around to look at me. John, she screamed, her voice desperate and shrill. John, please, tell them to stop. I am your wife. We have been together for 12 years. You cannot let them take me to jail. I stood there watching her. I looked at the woman who had been my world. I looked at the face I had kissed 1,000 times. And I felt nothing. The love I had carried for her, the guilt I had felt for failing her, the desperate desire to fix our marriage, it had all turned to ash. John, she wailed, tears streaming down her face. It was Carter. He made me do it. He twisted my mind. I love you. I love Leo. Please, baby, tell them. Tell them I am a good mother. She looked at Leo. Leo, tell Daddy to help Mommy. Don't let them take Mommy away. Leo buried his face deeper into my neck. He did not look at her. He did not speak. He rejected her with a silence that was louder than any scream. I looked at her one last time. I looked her right in the eyes, and I let her see the void where my love used to be. My wife died a long time ago, Elena, I said. My voice was calm, steady, and colder than the Seattle rain. I do not know who you are, but you are not a mother, and you are certainly not my wife. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing as the officers dragged her backward. The realization that she had no power over me, that I was finally immune to her manipulation, broke her completely. She began to scream a high, keen sound of defeat as they hauled her through the double doors. Carter followed. He walked past the table where he had sat, leaving behind his expensive leather briefcase. It sat there on the polished wood, bulging with the fake documents he had intended to plant in my office. It was a monument to his greed and his stupidity. He didn't look at me as he passed. He stared at the floor, a broken man who had gambled his freedom on the betrayal of a friend and lost everything. The doors swung shut behind them, muting Elena's screams until they were just a dull murmur in the hallway, and then silence. The room was empty now, save for David, myself, Leo, and the court staff. David packed up his files. He looked exhausted, but he smiled at me. A genuine, weary smile. He walked over and clapped a hand on my shoulder. Go home, John, he said softly. It is over. I will handle the paperwork. I will deal with the police. You just take that boy home. Thank you, David, I said. For everything. He nodded, then turned to leave, giving us the privacy we needed. I adjusted Leo in my arms. He felt heavier now, as if the adrenaline that had been propping him up was fading, leaving just a tired little boy. You okay, buddy? I asked, rubbing his back. Leo pulled his face away from my neck. His eyes were red, but they were clear. The shadows that had been haunting him for the last year, the secrets he had been forced to keep, the fear of his mother, the burden of protecting me, were gone. "Is she coming back?" Leo asked. "No," I said firmly. "She is not coming back. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever." He nodded slowly, processing this. "And Uncle Carter?" "He is gone too," I said. "They can't hurt us anymore, Leo. Nobody can hurt us." A sigh shuddered through his small body. It was the sound of a weight being lifted, a tension releasing that had been coiled tight in his chest for months. He rested his head on my shoulder again. "Can we get pizza?" he mumbled, his voice sleepy. I laughed. It was a rusty sound, a sound I hadn't made in so long that it felt foreign in my throat. But it was real. "Yes," I said, kissing the top of his head. "We can get pizza. We can get all the pizza in the world. Pepperoni?" "And extra cheese," he added. "And extra cheese," I agreed. I turned and walked toward the exit. I passed the empty plaintiff's table. I passed the witness stand where the lies had been told. I walked down the center aisle, the wood creaking softly under my feet. I reached the heavy double doors. I paused for a second, looking back at the courtroom one last time. It had been the site of my greatest fear, the place where I thought my life would end. Instead, it had become the place where I was reborn. It was the place where my son had become a hero. I pushed the doors open with my free hand. We stepped out into the hallway, and then out the front entrance of the courthouse. The heavy gray clouds that had choked the sky all morning had broken. The relentless, drizzling rain that had set the mood for the trial had stopped. The pavement was still wet, reflecting the city lights like a mirror, but the air was crisp and clean. A few shafts of weak afternoon sunlight were piercing through the clouds, illuminating the wet streets of Seattle with a pale golden glow. The noise of the city, the cars, the distant sirens, the chatter of people, sounded different. It didn't sound oppressive anymore. It sounded like life. It sounded like freedom. I stood on the steps of the courthouse, breathing in the cold, fresh air. I looked at the world, and for the first time in a year, it didn't look gray. It looked full of color. I looked at my son. He was looking up at the sky, watching the clouds part. "Look, Dad," he said, pointing. "The sun." "Yeah, buddy," I said, hugging him tighter. "The sun is out." I turned to walk toward the parking lot, toward our car, toward the house that was finally truly ours. "Let's go home, son," I said, the words tasting sweet on my tongue. "We are safe now." Leo looked at me, and then he smiled. It wasn't the polite, guarded smile he had worn for months to survive in a house filled with tension. It wasn't the brave, defiant smile he had worn in the courtroom. It was a real smile. It reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. It was the smile of an 8-year-old boy who knows that the monsters are gone and that his dad is there to catch him. "Yeah," Leo said. "Let's go home." We walked down the steps together, leaving the nightmare behind us, walking into a future that we would build together, just the two of us, brick by brick, stronger than ever before. The end. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It was an emotional journey, and I hope justice brought you as much satisfaction as it did for John and Leo. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening while driving, cooking, or maybe winding down before bed? Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on the story. Did you suspect Carter was the one behind it all? If you enjoyed this tale of justice and resilience, please subscribe to Calm Revenge stories like this video and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people who need a reminder that the truth always comes to light. Your support means the world to us. Stay safe and see you in the next story.